Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fifth and final episode of the Getting Started with Amazon DynamoDB virtual workshop. My name is Siyoung, and I'm a technical education manager for databases at AWS. I'll be your host and moderator for this workshop series. We are broadcasting from Seattle, from our home offices, and we thank you for being here throughout the entire series. We will try our best to address any questions that you have through both chat and through voice. In today's episode, we'll be building upon what we learned in the previous ones and walk through designing and creating an end-to-end modern serverless application using various AWS services like Lambda and DynamoDB. So with that, I'll hand it over to Pete, our expert on NoSQL databases. Pete, the floor is yours.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for the intro. My name is Pete Naylor. I'm a specialist solutions architect at AWS, and I focus on DynamoDB. So as you're probably aware, this was a series. I just want to point out that there were 4 episodes already, 4 sessions. And today we're moving on to the 5th session, which is really going to bring together a lot more of the serverless environment around DynamoDB, give you a little bit of an example, maybe give you some ideas about how to build these types of applications and some ideas for improvements. So our scenario today is a startup that's basically providing unicorn rides for their customers. And the name of the company is going to be Wild Rides. It's a fairly simple architecture, just for us to be able to work through the workshop and give you an idea. The customers that we can see out here on the internet are going to connect to a static site that is hosted in an S3 bucket. So in that S3 bucket, we will store HTML files, cascading style sheets, and JavaScript. So much of the application will actually run in the client in the browser. The application will use Amazon Cognito for authentication, another serverless component. And then we will make use of a number of other components, including DynamoDB, all serverless for dynamic content. Our API calls will come in, we'll pass through API gateway to a Lambda function, and that Lambda function will make operations against a DynamoDB table. So we have a lot to work through today. I want to move fairly quickly. Do please give us feedback if I'm going too quickly or if you have any questions, but there's a few detailed steps in here. I want to make sure that I'll pause and I'll point them out. It's relatively easy to skip a step or make a mistake and maybe have problems, but I'll try to make sure that I really point those details out as we move through the workshop. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is obviously we need to log into our AWS console, and we're going to start building out that static web hosting part of our application first, or part of our infrastructure. So I'm going to screen share now. All right, there we go. Hopefully everybody's seeing there that I've logged into my AWS management console. I do want to point out that I'm using the US East 1 region today, and we'll all need to use US East 1, otherwise some of the links that we're going to provide won't work and you'll have problems with the workshop. So please make a point of checking that you are in the US East 1 region before we get started. Right. So to move fairly quickly, I want to get through a couple of parts of the infrastructure and then come back more time and look closely with DynamoDB. So we're actually going to use a CloudFormation template to deploy our static hosting infrastructure. So come over here to the CloudFormation, and in that template we're defining the S3 bucket and all the components that are required to upload the various parts of our website into that S3 bucket. Young is going to paste in a link for our template, so please watch for that in the window, and you can cut and paste that as we move through here. We're going to use a pre-made template, so it's ready for us to go, and we're going to grab that from an S3 URL. I'm going to cut and paste that. All right, so this is a YAML file that is our template for the CloudFormation. It defines all of our infrastructure. It's hosted out on S3. I'm going to go ahead and move forward with that. Hopefully you have the link pasted in also. And we're going to create a stack. And we might call this Wild Rides Static. We also need to create a website bucket name. So this will be the name of the S3 bucket that will be suitable for DNS to use with S3, so no underscores. I'm going to call mine Wild Rides Pete Workshop 5. And I will go ahead and continue with that. It'll give us some more options here. None of them are terribly important for us. So we'll keep moving. And the last option it's going to give us is just asking us to acknowledge that the template might create some new IAM resources. And that's required for our...
Can you slow down just a little bit? I think people are still copying and pasting the template to get that started. Thanks. So I'll go ahead and create this stack. Can you go to the previous screen? I think people are just now copy and pasting their templates. Okay. Let me go back and I'll delete this one. Or actually, I'll just go back and do it as if I was creating again. Yeah, so that's creation. And here's the pasting in the S3 URL. Once we have that pasted in, we can hit next. We have to come up with a stack name, and we can call it whatever we want. I would suggest calling it something that you'll recognize. I used Wild Rides Static as the name for mine. One of the parameters that is required for our template to deploy is for us to provide that S3 bucket name. And this needs to be unique, so try to work something into that bucket name that is unique for yourself. Otherwise, it might collide with someone else who's running the same workshop with us. Petey, it looks like we're not seeing your latest screen. Are you seeing specify stack details? No, we're not. It looks like your screen share is not updating. Could you stop sharing and then try to reshare your screen, Pete? Oh, there we go. I think it's good now. Better? Good. Okay. Again, we're in here in specifying the stack details. We need to enter a stack name. As I said, I used Wild Rides -static. And here's where we have to enter a bucket name, an S3 bucket. It needs to be unique. So make up something that's unique for yourself, and all the rest of the items here can be left as they are. You might choose to use Wild Rides, your name,
static and workshop 5, whatever it takes to make that a unique bucket name. It then gives us some more options that we don't need to change anything on actually in this configure stack options screen. And the last step is it will ask us to review the settings. So here we can see our choices of bucket name. One of the options we will have to check is to acknowledge that we're okay with CloudFormation creating a new IAM role, authentication role for us as part of this demo. So we would need to go ahead and acknowledge that. And then finally, we hit the Create Stack button. So I've already done that. I'm going to go back and show what should be happening here. Once you hit that Create Stack button, you'll see a screen that shows your stack. It will give you information about what's happening at the time. And eventually, it shouldn't take too long, it will come back and say that the stack creation is complete. So when that's done, our S3 bucket is created and all of that static content is uploaded and in place, ready to go. How is everybody doing? Hopefully reached this point, maybe still waiting for that template to finish creating for that stack. So if we go then and look at the details of our stack, and go back and look, we can click on this, and again, across the top we can see some information or categories about our stack that we just deployed. One of them that's interesting to do is we can see the resources, all of the infrastructure that was deployed as part of this template or this stack. We can see if we scroll down, the website bucket is listed here. And that's actually a link that takes you to the S3 console for that bucket. I'm going to go ahead and open that in a new tab right now because we're going to need that a little bit later in the workshop. So we can see the S3 management console opened in the next tab. We'll leave that there for when we need it. The next thing I want to point out is that there are some outputs from our stack deployment. One of the things that...
By the way, Pete,
yeah.
There were a few people who got rollback complete as an error message for the stack status.
So a couple of reasons that may have happened. It may be the case that they used an S3 bucket name that someone else is already using. Feel free to go ahead and deploy that stack again. Try a different S3 bucket name, something that's more unique. Also, try not to use any characters in the bucket name that are not okay for use in DNS. Oftentimes people will want to use underscores or other characters that are not allowed. It needs to be no spaces and dashes are okay. Another reason that could potentially have created that problem is perhaps you're using the wrong region. Do make sure that you're in North Virginia in US East 1 in the console. Okay, so again, we can see our website URL here, and I'm going to go ahead and open that in a new tab also. So we should see, as long as our template deployed correctly and everything's working, we should see our statically hosted website content, which is running on S3 in the new bucket that we just created as part of our deployment. All right. How is everybody going? This is the first section of what we needed to do. We've created our static site using S3. Siyoung, are folks catching up, you think? Or shall I pause?
Feels like most people are. Some have the status has failed, particularly on the S3 buckets.
Yeah, those do need to be unique. So unfortunately, if you use something that someone else has already grabbed, that may not work. And maybe try again and add some random numbers or something that will improve your odds of finding one that isn't already claimed.
There was one question on requires capability _ IAM.
Okay, so that may be either that you didn't check the little box, or it could be that the account that you're logged in with, unfortunately, has restricted permissions. So you do need to have access to your own test account to run this in, where you have administrator access, so that you can manage those IAM rules.
I think that fixed it. It looks like a few folks are still waiting for stacks to be created. So let's give people a few minute or two.
Okay, sure.
And a question on, can the code bucket be world rides -US east -1?
So the code bucket shouldn't need to be changed. That should come from the template.
Cool, so we can keep that.
So while we're waiting, maybe just to point out what happened here with our S3 bucket that we created. In the S3 console, we can see that when we browse this bucket, there's a number of different directories. There's some static HTML files, index.html, all of the content that's part of our website. We have some images, fonts, and in here there is our JavaScript code that we're going to use. It's a number of files that we'll need to work with in just a little bit.
And can you show how you get to that test web page?
Yeah, so in the test web page, what we're going to do is look at the output from our CloudFormation stack. If we go to outputs up the top, one of the things that's returned when the stack runs and completes successfully is the website URL. So when we create that, it's going to give us this information back, and we can just go ahead and open that in a new tab, which is our website.
Seems like most people have caught up, so I think we can continue.
Okay, great. So the next thing we're going to do is, again, we're going to use a CloudFormation template that's already pre-built. We're going to deploy a stack for infrastructure that covers the authentication part of our architecture. It's going to make use of Cognito to do that, which is another serverless component. So we'll go back here to the stacks, and sorry, you can probably hear my dog in the background. And we'll go ahead and create stack again. with new resources. So this is a new stack. It's not a stack that we want to build around some existing resources. And we're going to use, again, the template that's ready, the Amazon S3 URL. And we have another link that Seung can paste in for you that I'm going to go and copy myself. And we're just going to go ahead and paste this one in like we did for the S3 bucket.
The S3 bucket URL should be in the chat window now for people to copy and paste.
So I'm going to go ahead and hit next on that. Again, we will need to give this stack a name. I'm going to call this one Wild Rides Auth. And here we'll need to paste in the name of that website bucket that we created. So just to confirm, I'm going to go back and I can see the name of my bucket in the S3 console. I need to grab that name and type it in exactly the same in this window. So just be very careful about getting the exact characters and spelling. So once everybody has typed in their own bucket name, make sure you use your own bucket name and not mine. We'll go ahead and hit next. We don't need to change any of the other options that are here. This is all fine. We can hit next again. So we can see again there is the website bucket parameter that I provided for this template. And again, down the bottom, we will need to acknowledge that CloudFormation may create some IAM resources, some additional roles to make this part of the workshop work. So I will again hit create stack. And here I can see my new stack is in progress. The first one where we created the static website content in the S3 bucket is complete from earlier. You can reload on that. It's still in progress, but it's making getting through a number of its different steps here. Now we can see the stack is actually complete. A pool of identities that we can use and create. Cognitive allow people to create their own accounts, but it will expect them to do some email address verification. So let's take a look at the console by going to the resources. And if we scroll down, we can see that as part of this template, we created a user pool. This is a Cognito user pool, and here's our link. Again, I'm going to click on that and open it in a new tab, like I did with the S3 link. and I can move over to this Cognito window to see a little bit more about this user group that I've created through that template. One of the things that we should check is we know that the password length we're going to set as a minimum is 8 characters. Password policy is that it's going to require a mix of uppercase letters, lowercase letters, some special characters and numbers. And it says that users can sign themselves up, but they will actually need email verification in order for the sign up to complete and their new account to become active.
Question from chat, Pete. Do you need Cognito permission to run this?
Cognito permission, probably you would, if you're restricted and unable to actually create Cognito user pools, then yes, this lab is not going to work. If we go now back to our Wild Rides website, one of the buttons we can click on is Giddy Up. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. That takes us to a registration page. So this is actually going to use Cognito to create a identity in that user pool, and it's going to be based on an email address. It's going to be verified, and I'm not going to use a real email address here. I'm going to purposefully use one that is made up and is not valid. DynamoDB at serverless.awesome. My password, again, it was important that we looked for those requirements because we are going to have to create a password that has lowercase, uppercase characters, numbers, and some symbols also. So go ahead and make up a password, and please make sure that you remember this because we're going to need it a little bit later. Okay, and here's where we would, if this were a real email address, someone would receive that message. They'd get a verification code that they could then plug in to have their Cognito user validated. But we're not going to do that. Obviously, my email is not going to be delivered. We used a completely bogus email address there. So what we can do is go back to the Cognito console and groups. I reload here. Here is one where I can actually click on and confirm this user so that I don't have to go through the email verification. I think someone else has also used my registration, so I'm going to confirm that user too, just so that they can follow along if they wish. All right. So the next thing we can do is we're going to assume that we've verified this, and we're going to use the sign-in address on our website. So we just need to go up to the URL and take away the verify.html. We're going to type sign in, all lowercase, no spaces or anything, .html. That will give us our page where we can use our new credentials to sign in to the Wild Rides application website. So my address was DynamoDB at serverless.awesome. And now here is where I need to remember that password that I created. Hopefully nobody's forgotten theirs. I'll go ahead and sign in. And now we're starting to see what looks like a pretty neat application that we have. It's all running in JavaScript. But we can see this is where we would be requesting a unicorn to come pick us up. We can scroll around on this map and zoom in and out. This is Seattle, Washington. Zoom way out and zoom back in. Another thing that's interesting is in this example, we built in an ability to see the auth token that is actually being used to provide temporary access to the website through that Cognito identity. So that's a nice troubleshooting feature. Obviously, it wouldn't be there in production. Okay. So we don't need the Cognito console anymore.
Yeah, let's
go ahead.
Take a step and answer some questions from chat. One person had user not found exception, username, client ID, combination not found.
ID except either something their Cognito template being deployed, or when they went to create the user, something didn't work. So maybe try that again. Make sure that you've got the right username and password. Also make sure that you go to the Cognito console and verify that user.
And a question from Simon, what was the fix for config rollback?
For config rollback, was that in the S3 bucket, or? I'm not sure which part that was, sorry. Maybe we can get a little more detail.
Okay.
And answer in just a moment. I am going to close this Cognito console tab now. We won't be using it any further. The next step we're going to do is we need to move on and start working on the rest of our architecture. This is using the serverless backend, so DynamoDB and API gateway, and also a Lambda function. I don't want to actually use just a template for this. We want to actually go through this in detail. Obviously, this could all be covered with CloudFormation scripts or templates also, and there could be a lot of automation deployments and so forth. But we're going to do it somewhat manually just so we can explain what's happening and what's being built.
It looks like a lot of people make sure that the email is case correct, because I think some people are having automations that are causing the issues.
Yeah, that could be. Okay, so this will be, this will be recorded. Unfortunately, maybe we've lost a few people along the way. Please do through with the video recording. Hopefully.
Also, we'll be sharing a self-paced version of this lab, so that all some of the steps. I'll paste that in the chat window now.
Great, thanks, Ian. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, as I said, is our serverless backend, and one of the first things to create there is our DynamoDB table. So I'm going to go to the console, and I will create table. Now, if you already have any DynamoDB tables, you may not get this first splash page. You may have to go to the Tables tab and then hit Create Table here. So either way, it's going to work and do the same thing. Just wanted to show both possibilities there so people can follow along. We're going to create a table that is named Rides. And this is one of those places where we need to be really careful to type in exactly what we have here. The table name that we're going to use is rides, R-I-D-E-S, and it needs to have a capital R. The partition key that we're going to use is ride ID. So again, that is R-I-D-E and then ID. We're capitalizing the R at the beginning and we're using the I in ID. Please do double check that just to be sure that we're not going to have a mistake there. So all of the rest of the options for our DynamoDB table are fine. All the defaults are good. We'll go ahead and create that table. So my table is complete. It's ready to go. One of the things that we can see for our new table in the overview is the actual resource name, the Amazon resource name, the ARN, for that particular table. And it's something that we're going to need for the next step. So I'm going to highlight that and copy it. Please do the same so it'll make things a little easier in the next step. So we need to create our Lambda function, but first we need to define some access control for that Lambda function. Every Lambda function is going to be invoked and run with a particular IAM role, and so we need to create that first. We'll go to the console. Identity and access management right here. We can go take a look at our roles. And what we're going to do is just create a new role. This will be for an AWS service because we want Lambda to be able to use this role. And because that's a very common use case, it's listed here, but we could also choose a different service if we wanted to. We are going to select Lambda. And next we're going to take a look at the permissions that we want to allow for that role. We want to be able to have Lambda do some basic things within our AWS environment, including logging to CloudWatch and some of those things. There is actually a policy that's created to cover some of the basic requirements for almost all Lambda functions. It's called AWS Lambda Basic Execution Role. So if we start typing up the top here, that will actually filter all of these policies that are pre-made for us, and we can put a check mark on AWS Lambda Basic Execution Role so that our Lambda function will have the ability to log into CloudWatch and do some of those other basic requirements. We can hit next. We don't want to add any tags. We can go to the next page, which is where we review the role. We need to give a name for this role. I'm going to call mine Wild Rides Lambda Role. All of the rest is fine. So I'm going to go ahead and create that role. Now I can see that I've actually created this role. There's the one that I created. There's a couple of others here that were created by those CloudFormation templates for us. I'm going to click on the one that I just created for my Lambda function because we need to add some additional access policy for our Lambda function The Lambda function is going to need to be able to work with our DynamoDB table, and right now it won't have access. So we will, under the Permissions tab, we're going to add some additional policy. I'm going to add an inline policy with what we've already created in this Lambda basic execution role. Here we can use the visual editor to build our policy. First thing we're going to do
there
is
was a question on which policy we selected for this role.
What was that, sorry?
Question on which policy did we select for this role?
We enabled the AWS Lambda basic execution role.
Thanks.
So the service that we're going to look for here, and I'm going to use the filter again, we're looking for DynamoDB. It's great. I can go ahead and click on that. It gives us various options here, different access levels. But one of the things that's really nice about DynamoDB is the fine-grained access control. We can actually say, we know our function is going to use the put item API. Maybe it doesn't need any others. So we're going to be very specific and just say that we want the put item API to be possible. Again, we're going to use the principle of least privilege here. We don't want to allow other APIs to be called by our Lambda function if we really don't intend to use them. The next part is where we're going to actually give the Amazon resource name for the table to make it specific also, because we want to restrict this function to only be able to put item against that particular table. And here is where I'm going to add the details of that table that I copied from earlier in the step where we created our DynamoDB table. We can see that it then fills out the region, the account number, and the table name for us. I'll go ahead and hit add on that. Now we can see our and everything else is fine. So I'm going to go ahead and click to review the policy. And we need to give that a name. So I'm going to call this Wild Rides Lambda DynamoDB policy. And create that. So now we can see that the additional permissions that we created in that inline policy have been added for this role that all of our Lambda functions or the Lambda function invocations will assume when they begin. Great. So we have our identity and access management sorted out. The next thing we're going to do is actually create our Lambda function itself. So again, that function is going to be JavaScript. We'll go to the Lambda console. And you can see that there's actually a couple of other functions here that were created as part of those templates. These are some Lambda functions that copied the static content into the S3 bucket for us, and also another one that updated our configuration for us for our user pool. But we're going to add a new function. I'm just going to create function. In this case, we're going to author from scratch. We're not really going to do that, but we're going to give you some code to copy and paste in. First, we need to give a name for our function. I'm just going to call mine Wild Rides. I'm going to choose to run this with Node version 10. And we need to specify the role that we're going to use for this Lambda function. So that's that IAM role that we created in the previous step. We can use an existing role, and here it will let us choose from the roles that we've created. This is the one we need, WildRide's Lambda role. Great. Go ahead and click the Create Function button. And this is where we can see the configuration for our Lambda function. Down below, if we scroll down, we can see a editor window. This might look familiar. It looks like part of the Cloud9 IDE that we've used for the previous sessions. Here's some example code that's already in there. That's not what we're going to use. We're actually going to use some code that is in GitHub. So Seyoung, if you would please paste in that next URL for some JavaScript code that's called request unicorn. I'm going to copy that one also.
The URL should be live in the Q&A window.
And what I'm going to do with that is just to paste that into my browser in a new tab and go to that URL. It is in GitHub. We can see the code down below. And I'm just going to copy and paste this. I'm going to copy it from this window where we can see it listed out in GitHub, all the way down to the bottom. Copy all the code, all 119 lines of it. I'm going to copy. And then I'm going to go back to my Lambda console, and I'm going to replace the example code that's already in the window with the code that I copied from the GitHub URL. So we can see that in this code there's a number of things going on. The interesting thing for DynamoDB is that we're going to open a DynamoDB client using the AWS SDK. Here we can see our fleet of unicorns, some information about them. This is going to be statically coded in here. If this were a real application, we would probably be storing our unicorn information in DynamoDB also. As we move down here, there's a number of other functions, but the important one is here, which is where when someone actually requests a ride, we're going to record that in DynamoDB using that put item call. And here's the table name and the rest of the information about the item. Here's our ride ID, which is required. That's the partition key for our table. And then some other information that we're going to store in that record. So now I have my code all pasted into that window. I'm going to hit save to make sure that we don't lose that. And that's all we need to do for our Lambda function right now. The next thing we need to do is actually expose that Lambda function as an API that can be called by our JavaScript application out on the S3 bucket. So we're going to create a API gateway now to enable people to use a REST API to call that function and get some maybe get some dynamic content or create a new record request or a ride request. We'll go up the top and we can go to the API Gateway console. in our API Gateway console, we're going to create a new API. There's a number of API types we can use. In this case, we want just a simple public REST API. So I'm going to go ahead and click Build on REST API. This gives us some information about creating our first API. So here's some options for our API. We get to choose, we want a REST API. It's going to be a new API. We're going to give it a name. We'll call this Wild Rides. Or actually, it could be, yeah. And we're going to say that our endpoint type is edge optimized. What that means is that this API gateway is going to be deployed using a content distribution network so that the user's latencies are going to be minimal wherever they are globally. That's all we need. So let's go to the next step, create API. All right. So now I have my new API. We need to configure it appropriately. The first thing we need to do is add an authorizer, because we don't want just anybody to be able to make this call. We want it to be the user who has authenticated using Cognito. I'm going to create a new authorizer for my API. We'll call that Wild Rides also. That's fine. And we're going to use Cognito as our authorizer. It gives us an option to choose our user pool, which we should see right in the pull-down list. There is my user pool called Wild Rides that we created earlier. We need to let API Gateway know the name of the token that is going to be passed. And we're going to use one called authorization. Do make sure you get the spelling correct on this also. Capital A. Now we'll continue to create. All right. So now we have an authorizer using Cognito for our API gateway. Next thing we need to do is create a resource. So this is kind of the part of the URL that we're going to use for our RESTful API. We already have
a quick question on where is this auth token defined?
The auth token. So that would be in the code. It's basically just naming what we chose to use as the name of the parameter for the token. All right. So we can see our root resource here. We want to create a new resource. And we're going to call it RIDE, R-I-D-E, all lowercase. You can see it's filled out the resource path for us. This would be the part of the URL that we would use to call this API. We will need to enable API Gateway cores. And we'll go ahead and create resource. Okay. The next thing we'll need to do is create a method for this resource. In this case, it's going to be a post method. That's going to be the way we're going to use this API. So I select post from the drop-down list here, and then I click the check button to commit that. So now we can see our new resource and the method that's listed underneath it. And then it lets us choose the integration for that method. In this case, it's going to be our Lambda function. We will select the Use Lambda Proxy integration. That's the little checkbox right here. Our Lambda region is correct. We're still using US East 1. We're going to be able to select our Lambda function that we created. Here we can see the one we called just wild rides. So everything else is fine here. All of the rest of the options are okay, the defaults. We'll go ahead and hit save. And it's going to want me to confirm that API gateway is now going to invoke the Lambda function with this resource name. That's good.
Pete, there's a quick question from Pankaj on why do we need course here?
I believe that it will need to be used so that we can call this API from the browser when we're using the URL for the static site. Okay, so now we see the ride resource and the post method. One thing we need to do is go ahead and change some of the details of this post method. We need to tell it that we want to use our Cognito authorization. So when we go, I'll go back just to show where this is. We go to our method request card here and click on the details. We can then go into select the edit button on the authorization. Right now it says none, but I'm going to change that, and in our drop-down list we can see our Cognito user pool authorizer, which is wild rides. So I'm going to specify that. And again, I'll click the check mark to confirm that and commit it. All right. Great. So we've built out our API now. The next thing we're going to need to do is to actually deploy this API. So again, in the actions drop-down list here, I'm going to select Deploy API, and we'll call this a new stage for deployment. This stage is going to be prod, for production. Make sure that we all type this in correctly, just PROD, all lowercase, as the new stage name, and then we can click deploy. All right, so that deployed those updates out to the edge, to our content distribution network. Now that API is available, and it provides the actual API or the URL for invoking that API. And that's going to be important. We need to make an update here in just a moment to include that URL. So please copy that URL. So we can use that in just the next step. All right. One thing we need to do now is to go back to our static site and update the code that's in that JavaScript to actually use our new invocation URL for our API that we created. So I went back to the S3 console that we had opened earlier. If you didn't open the new tab, just go to the S3 console and take a look through your buckets. You should find your bucket name that you created for the static content. And within that bucket, you can see all of our HTML files, some various folders. The one that we're most interested in is part of our JavaScript code. So we'll look in this JS folder. And we actually have a configuration file that's used for a lot of the other JavaScript code in here. This config file we need to update to include the invocation URL. So I'm going to click on this and we'll download it. There it is. So go find that file that you just downloaded, and we'll need to open it up in whatever is your favorite editor and make some changes to that file. I'm going to open with text edit. I'm going to zoom in here so that people can see clearly. So here's our configuration file. You can see it sets a number of different parameters that are needed by our JavaScript code. The one that we're most concerned with right now is this invoke URL for the API. What we need to do is change this value where it says base URL of your API including the stage. So everything inside the quotations. I'm going to replace that by pasting in that URL, the invocation URL that we got from API Gateway. How is everybody doing? Hopefully able to keep up. I need to save that. So I've saved my edits. And now I need to go upload the updated version back into S3. So I'll go back to the JS folder. And I'm going to click Upload. And I'll actually, I'm just going to drag and drop to make life easy for myself. There is my file that I had edited and updated. I'll do drag and drop. You can also select to go and find it and search through your different directories and so forth to find out where you stored that. But once you find it, we can see that config.js is listed here, and it's ready for me to go ahead and upload that to S3, which I will do. And I can see that it uploaded and it was successful. All right. So I can go back to my Wild Rides website now. We're going to test our new functionality now that we have DynamoDB, API Gateway, and our Lambda function providing that dynamic functionality for our website. I'm going to make sure that I reload this page, do a full reload just to make sure that we get the updated information, including that new config.js that we just edited and uploaded. Okay, so now we can see our map again. I'm going to try actually setting a pickup location. Let's go down here in South Lake Union, where there's a lot of Amazon buildings. Maybe we'll select a location right here on Terry Avenue North, so we can see the mark that I've placed. And I can hit Request Unicorn. Hopefully everything will just work. There we go. It confirmed that Rocinante, our yellow unicorn, is on her way, and then also confirmed when she's arrived. So I can try this again a few times. I'm going to set some new locations and hit Request Unicorn. So what's actually happening here is that we're making a call to our API, and it is actually invoking the Lambda function. The Lambda function is writing the information about this unicorn request into our DynamoDB table. hopefully everybody is able to make this work. Hopefully not any mistakes along the way. I know there was a number of different steps there, so some potential for error.
Question that does the pickup calls the API post method?
Yes, it does. When I hit set pickup, it's calling the API's post method and providing information about that location.
And another question, can you tell how to use signed in URL?
Signed in URL. Oh, the URL that we needed to actually sign in and authenticate. That was just signin.html. So replace anything at the end of the static site URL. It might be ride.html or some other page, but just replace that with signin.html, all lowercase, signin.html.
There's another question from Kishore on where does the data in DynamoDB ride table come from? How is it loaded to begin with?
So there was actually no data in the DynamoDB table. It was empty. We created it empty. But when we are clicking on our location here, there's some information that the JavaScript code collects on that location. And when we hit request unicorn, it sends that information as part of the API call to the post method. And then our Lambda function receives that information and records it into the DynamoDB item. And we can actually see that if we want to just quickly take a look at the DynamoDB console now. We'll see that I have my rides table right here that we created earlier. And if we look in the rides table, we can see some items. These are the items that were recorded by the API when I requested a unicorn. It used a unique ID for the ride ID, which is our partition key. It recorded a request time and some of the details about the unicorn that was selected for my ride. It also tells you the user who was authenticated. So we can see a number of people are testing this, myself and at least one other person.
I'm not sure if you know the answer to this one, but does the front end use plain vanilla JavaScript or some JavaScript framework?
To be honest, I am not sure about that. This is not my code, and I would have to dig in and take a look. But I would encourage you to check it out. It's out there and public. So take a look. Maybe you can improve on it or make some changes. Use it for some other purpose.
Looks like Shane says that it's just plain vanilla. Okay.
One thing I really want to make sure we do is actually go back and clean up all of these resources now. It really shouldn't cost very much to have them sitting around, but it is an S3 bucket, and I want to make sure that we do go back through and clean up the resources so we don't end up having some costs ongoing for each of you. So the first thing we need to do, that we can do really easily, is we can go back to CloudFormation, and we'll see our two stacks. The static stack that we use to deploy the S3 bucket. I'm going to select that, and I'll delete it. We don't need it anymore, and it will remove all of the resources that were created as part of that stack. So now we can see delete in progress. I'm going to do the same thing for the Wild Rides auth stack that we deployed for Cognito infrastructure. That will clean up our resources that were part of that also. Pretty nice and quick and easy. The rest of the resources we had created manually, so we're going to have to delete them manually also. First thing we can do is go to our Lambda function, and we can delete that. We don't need it anymore.
By the way, Pete, is the location, is it hard-coded to just Seattle, or do you know if there's a way to change it?
You can scroll around there and zoom in and out. I'm not sure if it's just Seattle area or what area has detail or not, but I definitely scrolled around and looked at some other areas on the map, so test it out. I'm going to delete our IAM role, our IAM role, by going to the IAM console. And remember, we named it Wild Rides Lambda role. So I'm going to find that one, select it, and I'll delete that role. Just confirm that. There is our DynamoDB table.